Dust. By definition, it is a naturally occurring energy propellant. But in reality, it is much, much more. Humanity has still yet to understand how dust came to be, and more importantly, how their involvement with dust will ultimately change the world of Remnant.
Well, that may be true in the long run, but it certainly doesn't feel like it's happening currently. Hi, I'm Rigger, and does anyone remember Dust? On YouTube, I have somewhat of a reputation of being a positive reviewer, which I don't know if that's fair. I like to believe I'm a fair critic, but the positivity comes from reviewing things that I just genuinely like. I really like RWBY, so my reviews lean positive for sure, because I enjoy what I'm watching. But particularly here, while we're in between stretches of volumes, I think it's fair to talk about the show as a whole, including some things that I'm not as positive about. Absolutely nothing is perfect, and if anyone says otherwise, they simply are in denial. Also, you might disagree with what I'm going to say. Also, we can learn things from how things have changed and evolved. Sometimes ideas you start out with at the start simply just don't end up working out in the long run. And today, I wanted to talk about that with Dust. Now, this discussion isn't going to be full of vitriol or hate. I'm not going to try and tear the show down, of course not. But what I think we deserve is a re-evaluation of what was said to be a core aspect of the show. From the beginning, we are told how important and unique dust is in this world, and yet as time went on, it's become just less and less important, less and less involved, and I think more importantly, less and less interesting in how it's used. In the early volumes, we had these great moments of exploring just what dust could do. In the first episode even had Roman using dust as an improvised explosive. So we're set up from the start to this new and interesting element to a world, and over time it just kind of fizzled out and didn't happen that much. I'd like to reiterate that on a grand scale, I do think when it comes to the lore, the big overarching story, that yeah, dust will matter. The whole dust didn't exist until after the erasure of magic and the first run of man, and man born from dust, and all of this I'm sure is planned out to have a proper answer and a bigger role to play. Stuff like dust and the fullness occurring at the same time, all that stuff, yeah, it will have an answer. It will play into probably more lore-related things towards the ending, shape our world, all of that. But what I mean is, on the more granular level, like episode to episode in the series, it just seems to have lost a lot of life of what it perhaps could have been. And where that really stands out is how it's also experimented with by our characters. Obviously, our characters have themes and styles that they stick to and prefer, either in character because they're better at these things, or just as a show so they each have identities, but right as our horizons started to broaden, they shrank again. Obviously, the somewhat exception here is Weiss, who on occasion pulls out the unexpected dust move still. She even incorporated gravity glyphs into being more common for her combat style, and she uses them a lot more now, and that's cool, it's become part of her repertoire. But despite her whole weapon gimmick being a rotating chamber of variety of dust, that variety just really doesn't come up much anymore. There's this one glorious moment that it did. Unfortunately, she's the victim of the abandoned time dilation as well, so she doesn't use lightning dust either. Which isn't her fault, but for the heiress of the Schnee Dust Company, that's how she was introduced, and the person who used the most dust on the team, the variety has really slimmed down over the volumes. And honestly, the next most to use it is Blake, who showed a lot of promise when we started seeing her incorporate more dust with her semblance too. But nowadays, even that gimmick is very rarely shown, if at all. In fact, one thing she did that I wish happened more was she also loaded up and fired off some alternate dust to change up her battlefield and her fight in Menagerie, which was really cool. But then it just never happened again. RWBY especially is the big one because we devoted time to this. It was plot relevant.
How about ammo?
Locked and loaded! Thank you, Schnee Dust Company!
But truthfully, RWBY fired more varieties of dust in her chibi sketch than she ever has in the show. In this fight, she fires one shot of electricity and one shot of fire that did nothing and made things worse respectively, but that's her learning curve, that's her first time doing that. Then we showed growth, as she fired electricity a second time at Nora, for a great idea that should have worked but didn't because we didn't know how powerful Tyrion was, but still, solid idea. And then, just never again. And the only other time she's used it was using it against Maria, but again, that had nothing to do with her, that was her using dust against someone else, and it doesn't matter that it was dust. I mean, it became heavy and weighed her down, but if it had blown up, it would have been pretty much the same. So, utilizing the fact it is dust didn't do a whole lot. And the worst is Yang, who has never loaded up Ember Silica with anything else. all the possibilities of what could happen has never been explored at all there. And I don't say all this to complain and say it ruins the show or anything, it obviously doesn't, but it feels like a creative element that was started and then left at the door, something abandoned part way and used here and there when they remember it, or when they need to get out of jail free card perhaps. Dust is usually just flavor to character design now, rather than using it to solve a problem. We can blow up a dust mine for propulsion, but nothing changes. If it was just full of generic explosives, it doesn't change anything. The fact it's dust means nothing. Things like Blake changing her battlefield and removing Ilya's camouflage, RWBY firing the lightning at Nora, and Weiss breaking out the earth dust. I had hoped for more of this concept with the weaponized dust elements at their fingertips, these creative solutions to problems, but we just never got them, or haven't got them so far. And this is not just something that applies to Team RWBY at all. The weirder concepts of dust are things that oftentimes got given to the villains, but they just sort of fell off. For instance, the one only person who actually did the dust-laced clothing was Cinder, and that was great at the start because it was Hammerly's promise. What do you do with that? It was an interesting element. And then it never came up again because she became a maiden and didn't need dust anymore at that point. So, without another person who uses that combat style, we just don't see it anymore. So all the possibilities of what that could do are gone. And none of our team adopted it, so it's just non-existent now. The same goes for Hazel, seemingly a master of the infused dust fighting that we saw glimpses of. The electricity was cool, and the only other time we saw it was his final fight, which was in a flurry, and we saw these really cool things, throwing a fireball, then using wind dust to launch himself into the air, and then this giant spike ball full of elements. Great! And then he's dead. It was those 3 moves. We only see it in these bursts with Hazel, and he's gone. I will also give a pass and say that was Volume 8, and Volume 9 was in the Ever After. But even there, it was kind of wasted potential of not having dust. They make it clear early on that they're running low on dust.
Good news, I'm low on dust.
And I thought, great, because imagine things like being forced to use a dwindling supply of dust. For instance, Blake is out of dust, like her ammo clicks, here, she's empty. And she's out of dust, and all Weiss has to spare is electricity dust. So Blake has to use some of it, and figure out a new combat style to do with it to survive. Or they just don't have any ammo, and they have to figure out new things. But nothing ever came of it, it just didn't factor into anything.
Good news, I'm low on dust.
But in retrospect, I will say for me, the biggest letdown in this front was Volume 7 and 8. Because, letting go of the Volume 4 locked and loaded stuff, you can say there was a dust embargo, so Mistral didn't have much on hand, that's fine. But once they get to Atlas, where the SDC is located and they're being equipped and supplied by the military, there's just no excuse for everyone not having as much dust as they need. Even characters like Oscar, who they recognize has to be protected and is slowly learning skills, but Ozpin isn't there in his head yet, you could have just given him a dust gun of some description. He could have, used different ammo for it to try and defend himself, or would have mixed up some of the fights, just something. But nothing came of it. And it just felt like a waste. It's not bad, it just felt like a missed opportunity. The only real way that dust expanded for the team, when they got to Atlas especially, came in the form of gadgets and built into their weapons. Jean by far the most, and it's good, it's kind of nice to see. The highlight extensions came in handy. We saw the benefit of them, allowing him to glide and allowing him to put up fortifications for his team. That's great. And there's also the pushback gravity dust on the shield, also pretty good. Seeing moments with the whole team bunkered down behind the shield give me that feeling again. Oh, we're solving problems. Someone has developed something new and put it to good use involving dust, something that they couldn't normally do. And as much as I love the whole gravity pushing away element on the front of the shield, it hasn't really been used in super creative problem-solving ways. Sometimes it gets used for a cool moment in a fight. I have no problem with people using cool things like that, in the blink of an eye in the midst of choreography, but it hasn't been used in a way to solve any problems or do something really original. And that's really what I was looking for, that spicy element. That, oh, we forgot that, you have electricity in your pocket, what could you do with it? But it just doesn't come up. To really highlight, weapons like Maria's that we see in the flashback really use some of the dust concepts well. Not using dust itself necessarily, but how to combine that with weapons to make these cool upgrades. But she had better moments than most of our main cast have had, and that was in a flashback that sort of means nothing. It was just to show off and be cool. But it's a prime example when I say there's so much promise. Look at how good it is. Look at how much everyone loved it. But instead, it's there for a brief moment and then kinda gone. Kind of like most of the moments that we've really utilized some of the things Dust can do. I think a perfect example of what I'm talking about is when people turn up to a fight, when our heroes arrive at a fight and our enemies arrive at the fight, or even if there's new enemies introduced, do you ever look at the dust they carry or the dust they fire and think, ooh, that could be a problem? Or think, ooh, how is that going to play into the fight? Usually the answer is no, because it doesn't affect anything. I think Illy is the only person where that thought maybe even came up. Especially because I thought, oh, this is a character who has motivation to perhaps not kill their opponent. Illy doesn't want to kill Blake, but stunning her, knocking her out with electricity, tasing her, that makes sense. And it's also, a whip is quite a non-lethal weapon, except it has a lethal mode we've seen, but she doesn't really use it like that against Blake. All that makes character sense. But in general, when our characters turn up to a fight, it's not like, oh no, that guy has electricity dust, that could be a problem. Maybe Mercury be like, oh, we have to account for the wind dust, but that's about it. You don't go, oh no, she has earth dust, and that could be a huge issue for the battlefield because they could change the landscape or something. It just doesn't come off that way, and it feels like there's a potential that it could, under the right circumstances. Another great example of this is actually Lionheart. He had a dust launcher, that was his whole weapon, but it never really came to much. He launched a few ineffective attacks, and nothing changed, and it didn't really counter anyone, and there wasn't really much that came of it. So, even though people make fun of this weapon idea, I think it's a cool idea in concept if dust mattered more, but it just didn't. And I really think that's a perfect example of how something could be really interesting there, and there's something waiting to be tapped into, but it just, so far, has never become an important element of the show, despite being an element that was introduced as if it would be much more significant than it's turned out to be. I think it's fair to say that pretty much everyone likes to see their characters learning and evolving, and problem solving. And that's a big thing that comes up in this show because our heroes are often outmatched. And it just feels like there's all this potential left on the table. Using more stone to block attacks from, say, Cinder, because she can't beat it with fire. That's something. Blake could take a note from Ilya's book and try stunning enemies with either electrical ammo or have added electrical dust to her blade in Atlas, taking that idea that she saw her friend using and how useful it could be, and take that idea with her when she gets her weapon remade. That would have been really interesting, and sort of carrying that character with her. And all the things you could do with basically a stun stick. But it didn't happen either. RWBY having a variety of dust on hand just feels like it should have been a thing a long time ago. We started it and it just stopped. Her ability to change the battlefield from a sniping distance, shooting out dust rounds that could become cover for her teammates, or changing people's direction, or doing anything. It really feels like the sniper part of her weapon gets let down by not utilizing all the possible ammo that could go into it. And let's not even talk about things like Yang doing her mobility thing, but instead doing crazy gravity-propelled ones like we saw from Ironwood, or maybe coating her fists in stone to hit harder, or copy Hazel's taser punches. But it just didn't happen. In Volume 8, even, when we get this brief sweep through of the battlefield, of all the Grimm and all the soldiers, I was really hoping to see a lot more dust on the field. Just a battalion creating stone or ice trenches to advance up the battlefield, or deploying hard light shields as covers to shoot over. Maybe a flame squad, a team of troopers using just wind dust to launch themselves around the battlefield, or gravity bombs to pin down, areas of Grimm and then focus fire them. A demonstration of what Atlas could really do, why you should be scared of them. And as always, budget and time play a huge role in the creation of the show, and that's recognizable. And, you have to understand that. But also, some of these things feel like they'd almost be easier to do than some of the choreography that's in there. I mean, even in that fight, you could just have the Grimm come up on the screen, and then get engulfed in flame, and pull back the camera to see, like, a battalion of Atlas soldiers that have, like, a flame insignia on them, like they're the fire squad. It just feels instead that they're all just generic soldiers shooting bullets, and I've seen that a million times. It's just the little touches, the things that make the world feel like, oh yeah, if you had this at your disposal and you lived in this world, especially in military and things like that, where you really need all the advantages you can get, how would you use this? And it felt like that was the promise we were given at the start of the show that just slowly over time eroded away. And I know, it sounds like I've been negative through this whole video, and in a way I have. I've been talking about things that I'm disappointed in because, again, nothing's perfect. But this is also an acknowledgement that none of these things are impossible even now. The show isn't over, so as long as we get more content, the team is back in Remnant. And they're in Vacuo, a place that has an abundance of dust. I hope that the last of humanity banding together, pooling their resources like this, in another place that canonically has it on hand. Even if there may be less manufacturing available, just some way to use it. I just want to see what we could do with it, what could be possible. I don't talk about this because it makes the show bad, I talk about it because it could make it so good. It holds so much potential. There's still, even now, so much potential with this concept, just laying there, waiting to be tried. I mean, we still have people like Mercury out there with his wind dust. I wanted to see more creative uses of that. But also, we have things like Salem and Cinder. These massive threats that we have a hard time beating. So let's see the team try and work on some crazy strategies. Something they could do to change the battlefield, change their circumstance, affect their enemies in a way that perhaps is doing more than just using dust to make it explode. Like, you can't kill Salem. But what if you just keep shooting her with as much lightning dust as you can to, like, tase her for as long as possible while you run away? Could you hold her in place for a few minutes? Or freeze her? What does she do? I mean, it's fine if you try it and she breaks out. Just show the creativity, show the idea, show them running out of ideas and trying and thinking on the fly. What do we do? What do we do? That's a great, situation to be in, running away from the evilest evil to ever evil that can't be stopped and just throwing everything in your pockets at it and just see if anything works. And maybe something does that you can use later. Just little things to add to the flavor of this world and really capitalize on something that is just sitting there waiting to be used, it feels like. So please don't think of this as a video of all the things I'm sad I didn't see. Just think of it as all the things I hope to see and hopefully we still do in the future. One of the things that has kept RWBY so strong as a fan community is all of the concepts just sitting there. It feels like there's a whole world to play in, and I just hope we get to see the actual canon play in that world just as much. And like I said, I'm sure lore-wise there's plans for how the dust matters, but I'm just hoping that maybe with some more planning we can make it matter in the day-to-day show again too. It's too good of a concept to waste, so maybe if we're lucky we can take it back to where it all started. But while you're here, why don't you tell me your best idea for what characters could do with dust? Be they a hero or a villain, what do you want to see? What can you cook up? And until next time, my name is RWBY, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I hope I did alright.